Chapter 3C. Chapter 3C continues with our discussion of the biological basis of behavior. This section focuses on genetics, evolutionary psychology, and its effect on behavior. This unit will cover behavior genetics, evolutionary psychology, and reflections on the nature and nurture debate. The first area we will look at is behavior genetics, predicting individual differences. Behavior genetics, or behavior geneticists, study our differences and weigh the effects and interplay of the hereditary and environment factors. So heredity versus the environment. This starts by looking at our genes, which is the codes for our life. Our genes are made up of several components. We have 46 chromosomes, 23 which come from our mom and 23 come from our dad. And chromosomes are composed of coiled molecules known as DNA. Genes are the small segments of the giant DNA molecules, and they form the words or the backbone of those chromosomes. Environmental events turn on those genes. Those genes are the building blocks of our physical development. When turned on, they provide these building blocks. The genome is the complete instructions for making an organism. So it's all the genetic material in the chromosomes. And there's been a lot of research done on establishing the human genome, identifying that. And what's really fascinating about this is that when scientists have compared our genome to the genome of other species, like a chimpanzee, they see a lot of similarities. For example, with chimpanzees, they have 96% of our DNA sequence. So 96% of the human genome and the genome of a chimpanzee matches. So it's that critical 4% that makes us human. One of the ways that they're able to study chromosomes and the effect of genes are through twin and adoption studies. And in the case of twins, we look at identical versus fraternal twins. Identical twins come from a single fertilized egg that splits in two. These are like nature's clones. However, just because twins have the same genes, that doesn't mean they always have the same number of copies of those genes, which helps explain why one twin may be more at risk for certain illnesses than the other. Also, most share one placenta in the womb, but 1 in 3 sets of identical twins have separate placentas. So one twin's placenta might provide slightly better nourishment than the other, which would explain why one member of a set of identical twins has a slightly different development. It's actually, in this case, an environmental factor because they had a different placenta and they may have more nutrition or less nutrition than their identical twin. It's kind of fascinating stuff. Fraternal twins, on the other hand, develop from separate fertilized eggs. Studies of identical twins show that on both extroversion, your outgoing nature, and neuroticism, which is basically emotional stability, on those scales, identical twins are much more similar than fraternal twins. So this would give us some insight in that having genetic material that's matching does play an important role in our development. This graph demonstrates the difference between identical and fraternal twins. You'll see on your left, the identical twin is one fertilized egg that splits and divides, and you have to be obviously same-sex only twins. Fraternal twins are 2 separate fertilized eggs in the womb, and of course they can be the same sex or they can be opposite sex. Now these are really fascinating, twin and adoption studies, the studies that are done on separated twins. At the University of Minnesota, you have studies on identical twins separated at birth. They are really the leading force in this area of research. In your book, they talk about the cases of the 2 Jims, which is a really fascinating case. But the twin studies at Minnesota, you have Thomas Bouchard, and he was the one who really started this whole process of twin studies. The Jim twins, which is a picture of these two gentlemen, are the story in the text, were separated twins, and they did not know about each other for a very long time. They had 38 years of separation. They were both adopted out at birth to two separate blue-collar families. They did not know about the other one for a very long time. And what's really interesting is that tests measuring personality, intelligence, heart rate, and brain waves of these two twins, they were virtually alike, as if they tested the same person twice. Yet they were raised completely separate from each other. So that would give a lot of support to the idea of nature versus nurture, right? Nature having such an important role in the development of our personalities and our lifestyles. Separated twins are more alike if they are genetically identical, of course, than if they are fraternal twins. Virtual twins are people that are the same age biologically and their unrelated siblings are much more dissimilar than identical twins. So if you have people that are the same age biologically, have similar characteristics, virtual twins, they are much more dissimilar than identical twins. Now, another area we look at is biological versus adoptive relatives. So genetic relatives, biological parents and siblings are very important, and then environmental relatives are people like your adoptive parents and your siblings in an adopted family. So what we find in this is that traits such as extroversion and agreeableness are people that are adopted are more like their biological parents than their adoptive parents. So this would indicate that just because people who grow up together, whether they are biorelated or not, they don't resemble each other very much in personality. So heredity is really important. It actually helps develop and shape personality. Parenting shapes things like attitudes, values, manners, faith, and politics. But it's really interesting. If you take an adopted child and you study them in terms of their aspects of their personality is more likely to represent their biological parents than any members of their adopted family. So that would indicate that your personality is biologically based and your beliefs, faith, things like that is more of environmentally based. Adopted children, for example, though, score higher on IQ tests and tend to be more happy and are more stable adults than their biological parents because of the environment that they're in, because of the fact that biological parents who give their children up for adoption tend to do so because environmentally they can't care for the child, but adoptive parents tend to be in a position to care for a child, and so that extra nurturing helps those adopted children to be better off and to actually develop higher IQs because they have more support than if they stayed with their biological parents. It's a fascinating study. So the point of this is your personality is based in probably associated with your genes, but environment can't be completely discredited because it does have an impact on how those genes are turned on, right? Very good. Now, when we're talking about this, we talk about hereditability. And this is the idea of the hereditability of a trait. This talks about traits, is the extent to which variations among individuals can be attributed to their differing genes. When we talk about hereditability in terms of groups, in terms of differences among people, we're talking about differences among people that are attributable to genes. Okay, so we're looking at that. An example about this might be height. So your hereditability of the trait of being tall or short. And that would explain the difference among people. This is just a term to know. In terms of heritable differences between individuals, this cannot be generalized to heritable group differences. So you can't generalize heritable traits between individuals and heritable group differences. For example, if a person is aggressive, that doesn't mean that the group of people that they hang out with is therefore an aggressive people. It is just one simple heritable trait that this individual has, but it can't be applied to the greater group in which they belong. This becomes important in the nature versus nurture debate. Genes not only code for particular proteins, they also respond to environments. People with identical genes but differing experiences have similar but not identical minds, and there's been a lot of research on that. These two things interact and work together. So you might see identical twins, but their personalities end up being pretty different. And one of the reasons is because while they share the same set of genes, those genes are turned on in different ways based on different experiences they have in their environment. Gene-environment interaction. So as I just said, genes and experience interact. Environments trigger gene activity. Traits evoke significant responses in other people. So that's important. So your parents might be very assertive or very authoritarian. Maybe you have a parent that occasionally loses their cool and yells. And while you might be abnormally and genetically programmed to be a more introverted and quiet, mild-mannered person in your personality, if you're being screamed at by someone, that might evoke different traits to come out in you. There also is the idea of birth order theory, where you are in your family. There are some people that believe in this, that if you're a firstborn, you're more likely to be assertive and all of these other traits. So your life experience has a huge role on what genes are activated and what traits are brought out in you. A new frontier in this area is molecular genetics, and this is really important. Molecular genetics people who study this area seek to identify specific genes influencing behavior. And one of the goals is to find some of the many genes that influence normal human traits, such as body weight, sexual orientation, and extroversion, and also to explore the mechanisms that control expression. Genetic tests now reveal at-risk populations for many diseases. For example, the most recent case, you saw Angelina Jolie discovered that she had the gene that makes her extremely likely to develop breast cancer. And so what she did was she took a very aggressive approach to prevention, and that she had a double mastectomy so that there wouldn't be any breast tissue for the gene to turn on and turn into cancer. So this is a big area right now. It has a lot of promise in terms of medical research and dealing with disease. At the same time, it's a mixed bag because it comes with a lot of ethical issues. For example, in China, where only having one child has been the rule for a long time, males are more valued. Well, if you can do genetic testing, people can have selective abortions for sex selection. A woman can find out that she is carrying a female child, and she can have an abortion, and she can continue to do so until she finds that she is carrying a male child. So there are ethical dilemmas, and unfortunately, selective abortions are occurring in lots of different places. So the good comes with the bad.